Today we will see how against all odds, one man faces a difficult task that seems merely impossible, but this task will show great courage, faith, and how overcoming something that may seem impossible for the flesh to conquer will show that with God, anything is possible. So part of God's story is about how the time that David fought Goliath, and it begins like this. David was the youngest of 8 brothers. His job was being a shepherd, which meant he spent all day in the field watching sheep eat and roll around in the grass. Meanwhile, some of his brothers were off with the Israeli army preparing for war against the Philistines. The Philistines were one of the toughest armies that the people of Israel had to fight. So one day, David was taking food to his brothers because his dad had asked him to, but when he got there, his brothers accused him of coming so that he could just watch the fight instead of tending to the sheep. Since David knew his heart, he was just obeying his dad, and he didn't mind being misunderstood by his brothers. Anyway, while David was there, he saw a huge Philistine man, more than 9 feet tall, stepped into this battlefield between the two armies. He was wearing a thick helmet and armor and carrying huge weapons. His name was Goliath, and he was definitely used to being the winner. David found out that Goliath had been stepping onto the field like this every morning for the past 40 days and saying, "Give me a man and let us fight each other." But nobody from Israel was brave enough to fight him, even the king. Well, David didn't like that this giant was intimidating the Israelites. After all, they were God's special family, and because God was with the Israelites, they could have courage in any situation. So David, who wasn't even a soldier, told the king, "Hey, I'll go fight against this man." Now, the king thought David was too small, but he really wanted somebody to fight Goliath, so he gave in. And David knew that he wasn't strong enough to beat Goliath by himself, but he believed God would be with him. So he said, "The Lord will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." The king hoped David was right. He even had his own weapons and armor put on David, but they didn't fit him, and David decided to go into battle in his regular clothes. That's how sure he was that God would help deliver him from this giant. Anyway, David went into this nearby stream and chose 5 smooth stones to use in his slingshot. Then he walked on the battlefield to meet the massive Goliath. When Goliath saw how wimpy David looked, he was furious. Goliath thought he would be fighting the Israelites' strongest warrior, and he said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? I'll give your flesh to the birds and wild animals." David might have looked like a wimp, but he was actually really brave. In fact, he was so brave that when he was taking care of sheep, he fought off bears and lions because God helped him protect his sheep. God was with David, and David knew that God would help him even with this giant. David says, "You come at me with a sword, but I come at you with the name of the Lord Almighty." He started to explain to Goliath that God was more powerful than anything. He also added that he would feed Goliath's flesh to the birds, which made the giant even more mad at David. Then David took a stone, he put it in his sling, and he slung it at Goliath. Goliath didn't even have a chance to swing his sword because the stone hit him right in the forehead, and it sunk in so deep that it actually killed him. He then face planted straight into the ground. Everyone was shocked. Then immediately David ran over to Goliath. He took his sword and drew it out from his sheath, and he took the sword and cut off the head of Goliath. David carried the head all the way back to Jerusalem, and when the Philistine army realized that Goliath was dead, they started running away like a bunch of scaredy cats. Oh my gosh. So you could just imagine them just seeing that their greatest champion dying, and then they're just like, "Oh no, what do we do?" So they just took off. So the Israelites went and chased them and killed them. See, God used David, who was just an average young man, to rescue his people. That's the story of David and Goliath. So in case you missed it, here's the quick version. David was a shepherd. He brought his brothers lunch. He saw Goliath. Goliath scared everybody. David wasn't scared, and he knew God was stronger than Goliath. He used 1 stone. God helped him kill Goliath. The Israelites won. God's people were saved. And that's a part of God's testimony.